Imagine a brilliant, athletic, over 6-foot-tall Renaissance prince.
Ah, the ultimate golden boy.
Right, exactly. He's fluent in multiple languages. He, composes his own music. He's this dedicated intellectual, and his people just absolutely adore him.
Sounds perfect.
It does. But hold that image in your head for a second, because now I want you to fast forward. Picture a paranoid, severely obese tyrant, a man with a 54-inch waist, who literally requires, like, mechanical pulleys just to be hoisted onto a horse or to be moved from room to room.
Wow.
Yeah. And he leaves behind this bloody trail of executed wives, former friends, dismantled institutions.
It is a staggering contrast. It really defies common sense that we're talking about the exact same human being here.
But we are. Today we are doing a deep dive into the life of King Henry VIII. And the goal for you listening isn't just to recite that famous schoolyard rhyme, divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived.
Right, there's so much more to it than that.
Way more. We are looking past the caricatures to understand how a desperate search for a male heir, some intense personal insecurities, and genuinely fascinating medical mysteries fundamentally altered the course of an entire nation.
Because what's fascinating here is the core question this history really forces us to ask, which is, what happens when ultimate, completely unchallengeable power collides with severe human frailty?
That's the crux of it.
Exactly. And to understand the tyrant Henry became at the end of his life, we first have to understand the psychological foundation of his youth. Because Henry was never actually supposed to be king at all.
Right.
He was the spare.
Yeah, he was the second son of Henry VII. His older brother, Arthur, was the Prince of Wales, right? The heir apparent.
Yep, Arthur was the golden child.
Right, so Arthur is the one being rigorously trained for kingship, literally from birth. He's taught diplomacy, statecraft, how to govern. But then, in 1502, tragedy strikes. Arthur suddenly dies at the age of 15.
So young.
And this is just 20 weeks after he had married a Spanish princess, Catherine of Aragon.
Which is a crucial detail. And suddenly, the immense weight of the entire Tudor dynasty is just thrust upon a 10-year-old Henry. But his father, Henry VII, he reacts to this tragedy by becoming intensely overprotective.
He practically locked him up, didn't he?
He basically did. Instead of, accelerating Henry's political education, his father kept him isolated, highly supervised, essentially hidden away in a suite of rooms. He rarely even appeared in public. So when his father dies and Henry takes the throne at 17, he is just completely untrained in the actual exacting art of kingship.
Okay, let's unpack this, because he's basically the understudy who gets shoved onto the stage on opening night without knowing any of his lines.
That is a brilliant way to put it.
So he decides to just, dazzle the audience with special effects and charisma. I mean, he immediately marries his brother's widow, Catherine, and just sets about crafting this ultimate Renaissance man image.
That is the perfect analogy. He was compensating for his total lack of political experience by projecting this hypermasculinity and overwhelming magnificence.
Yeah.
If we zoom out to the bigger picture, Henry's early reign was entirely about proving his legitimacy.
Right.
And he did this through lavish displays, extreme sports like jousting and, declaring war on France simply to win military glory.
And he definitely had the bankroll to do it. His father was notoriously frugal and left him this massive inheritance. It's estimated at like 1.25 million pounds.
Which is an astronomical sum back then.
Yeah, it was essentially the entire national budget for several years.
Yeah.
And Henry just immediately starts burning through it. We're talking 2,000 tapestries hung in his palaces, a massive collection of exotic weaponry, including 6,500 handguns.
Endless banquets, too.
Oh, yeah. And he even threw himself into the arts. Which, side note, I always thought he wrote that famous folk song Greensleeves to impress women.
Oh, the Greensleeves thing? Yeah, that's a total myth.
Wait, really?
Yeah, absolutely. The musical style of Greensleeves is based on this Italian composition technique that didn't even reach England until after Henry was already dead.
No way.
Yeah. But to be fair, he was a genuine composer. His real hit, the one he actually wrote, was a tune called Pastime with Good Company.
Pastime with Good Company?
Yeah.
Which is deeply ironic, honestly, because those pastimes eventually collided with this massive, immovable wall.
The need for an heir.
Exactly. The dynasty needed an heir. And this brings us to what the court called the king's great matter. This is the exact moment where the royal bedroom completely merges with international geopolitics.
And it really is a tragic situation. Catherine of Aragon's pregnancy history is heartbreaking. Over the course of their marriage, she suffered multiple miscarriages, stillbirths, neonatal deaths. Out of all of that, they had only one surviving child, a daughter named Mary, who was born in 1516.
Right.
But as Henry hits his mid-30s, he starts growing incredibly panicked. You have to remember, the Tudor dynasty was new. His father literally won the crown on a battlefield.
The Wars of the Roses.
Exactly. The collective memory of decades of bloody civil war over the throne was still very fresh. So Henry believed, and, well, the patriarchal society of the time completely agreed with him, that only a legitimate male heir could prevent another civil war.
And right in the middle of this intense dynastic panic, Henry becomes completely enamored with this charismatic, highly educated young woman in the Queen's entourage, Anne Boleyn.
Right.
Now, Henry had previously had an affair with Anne's sister, Mary Boleyn. But Anne is different. She refuses to just be a mistress. She basically says, no, I'm holding out for the crown.
She was incredibly strategic.
So Henry has to find a way out of his marriage to Catherine. He somehow convinces himself that the tragic death of his infant sons is actually divine punishment, that his marriage is literally blighted in the eyes of God.
And he doesn't just pull this out of thin air. He bases this entire argument on a specific passage in the biblical book of Leviticus. It basically states that it's an unclean thing to marry your brother's wife and that such a couple will be childless.
Ah, I see.
So Henry claims the previous pope never actually had the theological authority to allow him to marry Arthur's widow in the first place. Armed with this very specific argument, he appeals to the current pope, Clement VII, for an annulment.
Okay, but kings got annulments all the time back then, right?
Yeah.
It was practically a royal loophole for the wealthy and powerful. Why was the Pope suddenly putting his foot down and saying no to the King of England?
The answer is pure geopolitics. Pope Clement VII was essentially a political prisoner at that exact moment. In 1527, the troops of the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V had literally sacked Rome.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the Pope was completely under Charles V's thumb, and Charles V just happened to be Catherine of Aragon's nephew.
Oh, of course. So the Pope is trapped.
Exactly. The Pope could not grant Henry's annulment and declare Catherine's marriage invalid without infuriating the most powerful man in Europe, who, again, literally had an army sitting outside the Vatican.
So Henry is also trapped. He's blocked by a captive Pope. He's desperate to marry Anne Boleyn, who might be able to give him a son. And he realizes the only way out is to rewrite the rules of reality itself. If the Pope says no, well, you just fire the Pope.
Precisely. And this leads directly to the creation of the Church of England. Through this series of just sweeping legislative statutes orchestrated by his brilliant and frankly ruthless chief minister, Thomas Cromwell.
Cromwell was a mastermind.
He really was. So Parliament passes the Act of Supremacy in 1534. This act legally declares that Henry, not the Pope, is the only supreme head on earth of the Church of England.
And he backed that up with lethal force. I mean, this wasn't just a paperwork change. Parliament passed the Treasons Act, which made it a crime punishable by death to even speak against the king's new titles.
Right, words were treason.
Yeah. Refusing to swear the oath of supremacy meant you were a traitor. This is the exact mechanism he used to execute high-profile dissenters, most famously his former friend and Lord Chancellor, Sir Thomas More.
It was a brutal, incredibly systematic consolidation of power. And Thomas Cromwell didn't stop at just theology. He went after the physical infrastructure of the church. Cromwell spearheaded the dissolution of the monasteries,
Which was huge.
It completely transformed the English landscape. He sent commissioners across the country to audit the wealth of the abbeys and monasteries, and shocker, they conveniently found corruption everywhere.
So convenient.
Right. This provided the legal pretext to just shut them down and seize all their assets.
So, what does this all actually mean? Was Henry genuinely having this profound Protestant awakening? Or is this just the historical equivalent of burning down the house to remodel the kitchen?
Oh, it is much closer to the latter. Henry actually remained deeply conservative and quite Catholic in his personal theology. I mean, earlier in his reign, he had even written a book defending Catholic sacraments against Martin Luther.
Wait, really?
Yes. And that book actually earned him the title Defender of the Faith from a previous pope. So the English Reformation did not begin as some grassroots theological awakening. It was a top-down political and financial maneuver.
Follow the money, right. By dissolving roughly 800 monasteries, Henry transferred a full fifth of England's landed wealth directly to the crown.
A staggering amount of money.
It netted him something like £120,000 a year. And he desperately needed that cash because his endless wars in France and his wildly lavish lifestyle had completely exhausted his father's massive surplus.
But wait, how do you just confiscate a fifth of the country's wealth? Destroy centuries-old religious institutions that actually provided charity and healthcare to the poor and not face a massive revolt?
Well, he did face a revolt.
Oh, he did?
Yeah, it was called the Pilgrimage of Grace in 1536. And it was arguably the most serious threat to his entire reign. Over 30,000 rebels marched to the north of England to protest the destruction of the monasteries.
30,000. That's a massive army for that time. It was.
Yeah.
And Henry didn't have a standing army large enough to defeat them in open battle. So he used deception. He basically promised the rebel leaders pardons and a parliament to hear their grievances if they dispersed.
Let me guess he lied.
Of course he did. The moment they went home, he broke his word, rounded up the leaders, and executed hundreds of them. And as for the powerful nobility who might have joined in, Cromwell ensured their loyalty by selling them the confiscated monastic lands at cut-rate prices. He essentially made the nobility complicit in the theft.
Wow. So Henry gets his money, he gets his new church, he suppresses the rebellion, and he marries Anne Boleyn. She gives birth to a daughter, Elizabeth. He has absolute power. You'd think this would be his golden age, right?
You would think so.
But 1536 isn't just the year of the rebellion, it is the year everything breaks. Physically and psychologically, Henry just shatters.
1536 is the absolute pivot point of Henry's life. Let's just look at the compounding trauma of that single year. On January 8th, Catherine of Aragon dies in exile. Anne Boleyn is pregnant again, and she knows the pressure to deliver a son is monumental. Then, just 2 weeks later, on January 24th, Henry is competing in a tournament and suffers a catastrophic jousting accident.
That's the big one.
Yeah. He's thrown from his horse, wearing full heavy armor, and the horse reportedly falls directly on top of him. He lies completely unconscious for 2 hours.
2 whole hours. And when news of this horrific accident reaches Queen Anne, the shock is so severe that she actually goes into premature labor and miscarries a male child.
Yeah.
And the historical irony here is just brutal. This miscarriage reportedly happened on the exact day of Catherine of Aragon's funeral.
It's almost unbelievable, and losing that male child was really the death knell for Anne Boleyn. Her vivacious, highly opinionated nature had once captivated Henry, but now it just grated on him. Plus, she had powerful enemies at court who saw an opening.
And they took it.
They absolutely did. Within months, she is arrested on fabricated, highly debated charges of treason, adultery, and incest. And on May 19th, 1536, she is beheaded by a French swordsman.
And Henry is literally engaged to his next wife, Jane Seymour, the very next day.
It's chilling.
It is. Now, Jane finally gives him the son. He was literally torn the country apart for Edward. But then she dies from an infection shortly after childbirth. It's just this endless cycle of tragedy. But I want to go back to that jousting accident for a second, because the popular narrative has always been that Henry went mad in his later years because he had syphilis.
Right, you hear that everywhere. But modern historians and medical professionals widely dismiss the syphilis myth.
Really?
Yeah, there is no evidence he was ever treated for it, and his doctors kept meticulous records. If you really want to understand his physical and mental decline, you have to look at the mechanics of what actually happened in 1536.
The trauma from the fall.
Yes. That jousting accident reopened an old wound on his leg. And because of his massive weight and poor circulation, that wound never healed. It festered, ulcerated, and literally had to be continually drained for the rest of his life.
Oh, that's horrific.
The chronic pain must have been agonizing. It entirely prevented him from maintaining the intense physical activity he was used to, which explains the explosive weight gain. He went from this athletic Renaissance prince to a man whose mobility was completely compromised.
But the psychological shift is what's truly terrifying to me. Going from a ruthless but rational politician to this deeply paranoid tyrant. I was actually reading about the medical theories surrounding his 2 hours of unconsciousness, specifically regarding traumatic brain injury.
Oh, it makes a staggering amount of sense. If you look at modern patients who suffer severe frontal lobe damage, which is highly likely when a horse falls on a man in full armor, you often see exactly the symptoms Henry displayed post-1536.
Wow.
You see extreme emotional volatility, severe paranoia, impulsivity, depression, and profound personality changes.
That reframes his entire later reign. I mean, it's not just the cliche of absolute power corrupting absolutely. It's a man operating with untreated, severe neurological damage. And there's another fascinating medical theory I want to bring up that might explain the string of miscarriages that drove him to these extreme measures in the first place. The Kell-positive blood type theory.
This is such a brilliant piece of retrospective diagnosis. The Kell blood group is a rare genetic marker. If a Kell-positive man has a baby with a Kell-negative woman, the first pregnancy is usually perfectly fine.
Which perfectly mirrors the healthy births of both Princess Mary and Princess Elizabeth, right?
Exactly. But during that first birth, the mother's blood mixes with the child's, and the mother's immune system builds antibodies against the Kell antigen.
So her body essentially treats any future Kell-positive pregnancies as a foreign threat.
You nailed it. The antibodies attack the fetus, causing subsequent pregnancies to miscarry late in the term, or the babies to die shortly after birth. This perfectly explains the tragic, repetitive reproductive failures of both Catherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn.
That is mind-blowing.
And it goes even deeper. Being Kell-positive is sometimes linked to a rare genetic disorder called McLeod syndrome. McLeod syndrome affects the nervous system and causes physical deterioration, muscle weakness, and psychiatric symptoms like paranoia and cognitive impairment that usually onset in middle age.
That is incredible. It completely aligns with both his physical deterioration and his mental collapse. So we basically have a king trapped in an agonizing body, suffering from potential brain damage and genetic disorders, wielding absolute power over millions of people.
It's a recipe for disaster.
It really is. This isn't just a royal court anymore. It's a terrifying hostage situation. His court becomes this deadly factional war, operating like a brutal corporate hostile takeover, where ministers use the king's paranoia as leverage to literally assassinate their political rivals.
Thomas Cromwell is the prime example of this. The man who engineered the Reformation, dissolved the monasteries, and essentially built the modern English administrative state, falls victim to the exact paranoia he helped cultivate.
Oh, the irony.
Seriously. Cromwell tries to set up Henry's fourth marriage to a German princess, Anne of Cleves, to secure a Protestant alliance. He basically sells Henry on the match using a highly flattering portrait painted by Hans Holbein.
And here's where it gets really interesting. The first physical meeting between Henry and Anne is a legendary disaster. Henry tries to surprise her in disguise, which is like this romantic game he used to play in his youth. But he is now an obese, ulcerated, terrifying man.
Not exactly Prince Charming anymore.
Definitely not. She doesn't recognize him and is naturally put off. Henry's ego is completely shattered. He actually complains that she has very evil smells about her and that by the closeness of her breasts, he took her to be no maid. He refuses to consummate the marriage and forces an annulment almost immediately.
And that single miscalculation gives Cromwell's enemies, led by the conservative Catholic faction and the Duke of Norfolk, the opening they desperately needed. They feed the king's paranoia, suggesting Cromwell is a traitor, plotting to bring a radical Protestant revolution to England.
And because Henry is now so impulsive and easily manipulated,
He signs off on it. Cromwell is arrested without trial, charged with treason, and beheaded.
and the hostile takeover is complete. Because on the exact same day Cromwell is executed, Henry marries wife number 5, the 17-year-old Catherine Howard, who just happens to be the Duke of Norfolk's niece. The conservative faction pushes her into the king's bed to secure their own power.
But Catherine Howard is a teenager, trapped in a terrifying marriage to a decaying, paranoid man 30 years her senior. Unlike Anne Boleyn, whose charges were largely fabricated, Catherine actually does engage in reckless affairs with men closer to her own age, specifically Thomas Culpeper and Francis Dereham.
Which is incredibly dangerous.
Beyond dangerous. When the King's Council discovers this and presents the evidence to Henry, he reportedly breaks down in tears. But then the ruthlessness returns. Catherine Howard and her lovers are all executed.
It is just compounding misery. Finally, we get to wife number 6, Catherine Parr. She is a wealthy, highly educated widow, and she realizes she isn't just marrying a husband. She is managing a violently unpredictable patient.
Yes. She acts as his nurse, but she is also a passionate religious reformer. And she actually came terrifyingly close to the executioner's block herself.
Because she argued with him, right?
Exactly. She engaged in intense theological debates with Henry, which offended his massive ego. The conservative faction literally had an arrest warrant drawn up for her.
Wow.
But Catherine Parr was a master of political survival. When she realized the danger, she immediately threw herself at Henry's mercy. She claimed she only debated with him to take his mind off the pain in his leg and, to learn from his superior divine wisdom.
Oh, that is smart.
It was an act of total submission that stroked his ego perfectly. He canceled the warrant.
And her survival is crucial to English history, because she manages to reconcile Henry with his 2 daughters, Mary and Elizabeth. She persuades him to pass the Third Succession Act, which legally puts both women back into the line of succession behind their half-brother, Edward.
Which sets the stage for the ultimate historical irony of Henry's life.
Absolutely. Just think about the sheer scale of the destruction here. He tore his country apart, executed his closest friends, destroyed centuries-old religious institutions, provoked massive rebellions, and killed his wives, all to secure a male heir.
Yep.
And he finally gets his son, Edward, who takes the throne but dies at age 15. Then his Catholic daughter, Mary, takes over and violently reverses the Reformation. But ultimately, it was the daughter he literally declared an illegitimate bastard, the child of the wife he beheaded for treason. Elizabeth I, who would ascend to the throne, rule for 45 years, and become one of England's most legendary monarchs.
It's incredible.
Everything he did to avoid a female ruler resulted in the greatest female ruler in British history.
History rarely offers a neater paradox than that. So as we evaluate the legacy of Henry VIII, we are forced to synthesize two deeply contradictory truths. On one hand, the historian G.R. Elton famously described Henry as an egocentric monstrosity, and the evidence supports that.
Without a doubt.
His reign was defined by terror. He executed leading public servants, dismantled the social safety net by destroying the monasteries, and slaughtered thousands of ordinary citizens. He also debased the English currency to fund his disastrous foreign wars, which triggered catastrophic inflation that impoverished the working class.
But then there's the other side of the ledger,
Yeah.
the architectural foundation of the state itself.
Right. Out of this tyrannical paranoia, the modern English state was formalized. He legally united England and Wales. And because he was terrified of a Catholic invasion after breaking with the Pope, he heavily fortified the entire English coastline.
Which was a massive undertaking.
Huge. And perhaps most importantly, he's recognized as the principal founder of the Royal Navy. He expanded the fleet from just a handful of ships to over 50, including the famous warship the Mary Rose. He established the permanent administrative machinery to maintain that fleet, creating the Council for Marine Causes, which eventually evolved into the Admiralty. So the global naval dominance of the British Empire over the next few centuries, that begins with Henry's desperate need to defend his isolated island.
So what does this all mean for us listening today? It's a profound and frankly terrifying case study in leadership. It proves that we really cannot separate the personal from the political. The deeply personal neuroses, the hidden physical agony of an ulcerated leg, the potential neurological damage from a sports injury, and the unchecked ego of a single individual. They completely redrew the map of human history.
We did.
When power is absolute, personal insecurities don't just influence public policy, they dictate it.
And if we connect this back to the very beginning of our conversation, this raises one final lingering thought for you to consider. We talked about Henry's older brother, Arthur, who was born and trained to be king. Henry, given his first-rate education, his genuine piety in his youth, and his intellectual leanings, was initially destined for the church.
Right, he was the spare.
Had Arthur lived, Henry would have likely ended up a wealthy, highly educated Archbishop of Canterbury.
A completely different life, a completely different world, honestly.
Imagine it. But Arthur died at age 15 of a mysterious sweating sickness, which means that so much of the world as we know it, the English Reformation, the bloody centuries of religious conflict that followed, the eventual creation of the British Empire, and the naval dominance that shaped the globe, all of it hinged entirely on the fragile immune system of one 15-year-old boy in the year 1502.